Welcome to the HRLocker podcast. On today's show, we have Aisling Curtis, Commercial Director of Microsoft Ireland. In addition to her role on the senior leadership team at Microsoft Ireland, Aisling has also sat on boards in Ireland, the UK, the Netherlands and South Africa. Today, Christelle runs through the findings of a recent Microsoft survey on the future of work, and it highlights some interesting insights that business leaders and employees will face as things slowly start to return to the new normal. Figures show that hybrid working is here to stay, which means changes will have to take place when we do return to a flexible working lifestyle. Your host today is Christelle Rinn, Chief Marketing Officer in HRLocker, and she asks Aisling about innovation and about how you could create an environment to support innovative ideas, even when remote working, and the importance of providing a safe place to fail.
So today we have Aisling Curtis with us from Microsoft. So Aisling, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us today. And if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself and your role at Microsoft.
I will indeed. Thanks for having me. So I'm Aisling Curtis. I'm the Commercial Director for Microsoft Ireland. And that role, really the remit is leading our partner ecosystem and the teams that support the partners as well, and all of our customers across our enterprise, public sector and SMC, so our small, medium and corporate customers as well. So I lead the partner organisation that supports that, and they're all of our partners that we work with, everybody from consulting firms through to solution integrators and indirect and distributor partners. We also work with what we call ISVs, so independent software vendors, who would service many of our customers from a vertical point of view, maybe around a particular industry, or a horizontal, maybe a storage, for instance, or a data and AI type niche partner or security.
So Aisling, one of the reasons I suppose that I had asked you to come on the podcast, and was one of the reasons I suppose I had stalked you down, was was around the survey that Microsoft had done in regards to the future of work, and a few things I suppose that I had expected to see, which was around that increase of productivity around remote working, which I'm a huge advocate of. And then also things like I suppose, expected to see that with that you had to have a change in leadership style. But what I hadn't expected to see was that there was sometimes a drop in creativity and innovation in companies. Can you tell us a bit more about, what your findings kind of found there?
Yeah, sure. So for the past 3 years, we've been examining the future of work. We did a European-wide research project, and we've been releasing insights each year. So last year, we identified the importance of that innovative culture to help organizations really adapt and disrupt their markets, drive more competitive advantage. Of course, then we've seen the onset of COVID-19, and we've seen that really a 200 plus year model was completely upended. So, we've actually seen either a maintenance or a growth of productivity, and that was aligned to 7 out of 10 of the business leaders' views. We have seen a need to change leadership styles, where people need to get, I suppose, more focused on the remote, which is kind of obvious, right? But actually more the diverse groups, making sure that everybody is included. So a real change in leadership and adaptability of leaders in that sort of environment. But yes, another aspect of it is really around the innovation and the impact of that. And if you think about it, you don't really have that water cooler moment, or leaving the room where you're transitioning to another room, let's say, or a different part of the building where you're chatting about a problem that came up in a meeting, for instance. So that DNA around the innovation really needs to be very purposeful. So what you see is this creation of activities like, obviously workshops, hackathons, where you take a problem from a customer point of view or a partner or whatever it is in terms of product innovation, and you're really trying to ensure that people are huddling around that and coming up with ideas and helping to create that innovation. So it's a different way of doing it, whereby you're very purposeful about it. And so, in fact, our survey hadn't actually seen, or our research hadn't actually seen a decline. But what it did see in the European-wide stats was that there was a decline. So it's more of a cautionary highlight that I would say for the Irish market, that this is a potential issue that's going to start affecting us if we're not starting to think, how can we make sure that an innovative culture is there? And what we mean when we're saying about an innovative culture is that people are feeling comfortable to make mistakes. They're feeling comfortable to create, and that their voice is going to be heard about ideas, about problem solving, and that they feel empowered, and that that empowerment really leads to those coming up with ideas to solve an issue for a customer or solve an issue for the organization in that moment. Yeah. And that's the bit that we really have to pay attention.
And I would agree, even in our own company, is, innovation or that creativity a lot of the time came from people being around the same table, and that you're, kind of shooting ideas off each other. Whereas now it has to be more structured, unfortunately, but you still need to be able to empower people to come up with ideas in a structured way, which I do think a lot of the time, if you're on Zoom and or Teams or whatever it is that you're using, and all of a sudden you feel like you have this idea, you might think, well, maybe I'm not going to bring it up because I just think I don't want to fail in front of everybody else.
Yeah.
So it's really up to companies to create that environment that it's a safe place to fail.
Absolutely. And one of our research findings was that 71% feel it's okay to make mistakes when they're in an innovative culture.
Yes.
Can you imagine the impact that has then in the productivity, in the development, the problem solving, the critical thinking that you really need to be able to adapt, not just in the current climate, but to really drive for a competitive advantage?
Absolutely. And it's something that, will benefit your business. There is a benefit to your business, and to the person in every way. But around that, I take an example for myself. There is that leadership style change that is required, regardless of the last 12 months in terms of COVID and remote working. I think we're all on the same page that there will be some element of remote working that will remain to the future, which means that the leadership style has to change. I think it's kind of more of a hands-on approach, or kind of more of that reaching out approach.
Yeah, so I'll give you some of the findings and then maybe talk a little bit about it. So 58% said that they feel they have not yet effectively learned how to delegate and empower virtual teams. 58%.
Wow.
More than half. Yeah. 56% of leaders found it harder to create a strong and unified team. So if you think about it, managers and leaders need to be thinking about how do they solicit everybody's input and bring the entire team along. Mm-hmm. And when they themselves are starting to raise concerns that they don't have those skill sets about how to empower virtual teams, I mean, in truth, that isn't a new issue, let's face, other than the virtual part of that. That has always been something that organizations have had to develop and build that muscle around empowering teams and really motivating teams. And I guess it comes across very much so at the moment, the importance of people being really aligned to their purpose. And there's loads of discussion about that, let's face it. But really being emotionally attached to what they're doing, because it's so easy to disconnect in the current climate. So really making sure that our managers and our leaders are embracing everybody's individual motivations and trying to work with them in a more customized way, to ensure that they're really attached to what they're doing and seeing the big picture as part of that. And one of the things that I think I personally am very passionate about is the need for empathy, not just in the current climate, but in our organizations overall, where you have that connection be it from a manager point of view or a leader point of view with your teams, and really understanding their perspective. And then that really connects with the inclusivity, which again goes back to your point. Do people really want to fail in front of others when they're in a virtual situation? It's about creating that innovative culture where people feel that they can make mistakes, they can speak up, they can disrupt the thinking in the appropriate way.
Yes, and they'll be, regardless of if the idea is accepted or brought forward, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be inclusive.
Yes,
which is the key.
Exactly.
So the other, I suppose, we're looking at that leadership style and creating that great environment. But, the other thing I thought was quite interesting is that in terms of attracting and retaining talent, these are kind of that remote element and that change of leadership styles are things that you're going to have to implement at this stage, because that's just what people expect now.
Absolutely. And that came across loud and clear in the research findings. So well over half, so it was like 68% of business leaders saw remote working as key to retaining talented employees. The average in the European research was 56%. Wow. So that is really marked in terms of the impact. And I know myself, even personally, we were chatting before we started recording, I certainly can see the benefit of a hybrid workplace. Do I necessarily want to be working from home full time? I don't personally, but I certainly see the value and the importance from retaining my staff and employees, and really making sure that people are having the best opportunity to have a really balanced work and life environment.
Yeah. And I do think that after the last 12 months, we've been called an experiment, whatever way we want to put it, of this remote working. I do hope that it's changed a lot of companies' minds in regards to they may have had been biased against remote working, that, well, I won't see what my people are doing, I won't know while they're actually working. I would hope that they can see that their teams are still being productive. But on that, I suppose, Aisling, one of my hobby horses is that I'm so against people just measuring people's time, that they're just clocking in 9 to 5:30 or on your Microsoft Teams to make sure that the little green light is on all the time. That means that the person is working. So how do we step away from that culture of just that the data is showing, yes, Aisling was here 9 to 5:30, great, and move towards that? Let's measure the productivity and measure the outcomes, and rather than just measuring that clocking in and out. There's $1 million question for you.
Yeah. Well, I can give you a bit of insight from the research and then my own personal view, right? So 7 in 10 leaders saw equal or more productivity from remote working. So that tells you something straight away, right? And I personally have spoken on a number of occasions about the importance of impact. And even as we were discussing earlier, the importance of outcome-based leadership. And when you really get a team that are highly motivated and high performance around a particular goal or a vision and direction in terms of how they're supporting customers or partner or the market or whatever it is, and that they're really emotionally connected to that, you don't have those sorts of issues around presence versus impact. Now, are you necessarily going to have your entire team performing at the highest rates at all of the time? No, you're talking about an average, right? You are still going to have to deal with performance issues. But my personal view is that shouldn't be around the presence. And if you're managing it around performance or around presence, you're actually more likely to have issues around performance management. In fact, if you can break that cycle and really create an environment which people feel empowered in, and that innovative culture, you start to see a focus much more around the impact that people are having and the pride that people take in that. And then that feeds into your recruitment strategy. So when you're actually looking to recruit, what are the drivers? What are the types of skill sets, but more their potential of the candidate that you're looking at? So is it a case that you're looking for people to have, critical thinking skills, that they're adaptive, that they're very driven or self-starter in the environment, but that they're also helping to problem solve? When you're creating an environment around that empowered environment, it becomes much more around the impact that the employee is having, and then trying to get that impact at scale, right? Which is what we as leaders, it's our job, creating that environment to do that.
Yeah, I think, we're talking remote working now, and again, we're huge advocates of remote working here, and with remote working comes huge benefits, and I think you get that flexibility of working, and I definitely think I would absolutely agree with you in terms of the cautionary tale that it's a warning here. We've got to be able to adapt to make sure that we're giving the right environment to foster that creativity. One of the things I think companies struggle with somewhat is that onboarding stage remotely. Yes. Because I just think it just adds another level of complexity. Not impossible, but definitely a challenge. So how do you, what recommendations would you give to companies in terms of that remote onboarding?
Yes. So in the research, we found lots of benefits, right? So 79% loved the dressing casually. Okay.
I'm one of those.
Yeah, 56% loved the more time for hobbies. I'm one of those. 32% loved working with their pet by their side. I am definitely not one of those.
I am not one of those.
2 giant dogs and a horse, and I definitely do not want that in the environment. But there are lots of benefits that people felt. One of the cautionary tales that organizations had found was actually that when they're recruiting, the onboarding piece, and really at a human nature level, you really want for people to feel welcomed, not just that they're starting and that they functionally get their laptop and their job spec and all those sorts of things, but actually that they're feeling as though they're being embraced into the organization, and that they feel as though they're going to be part of that organization. So that's something that we have worked a lot on from a Microsoft point of view, so that there is a very standardized approach, which doesn't sound that humane in the way that I say that, but it actually is. It's really making sure that there is X number of calls out in the advancing stages coming up to somebody's start date by the manager, by the HR person, various different contacts. There's a buddy system in place, somebody who is currently doing the role or that role in a different country. That there is, in the first day when the person starts working in the organization, that their manager is there at the very start and welcoming them, that they are getting straight onto the email address, the aliases, to get the invites for the team meetings. They're all really practical things, and you would think the basics, but they're the things that get overlooked. Extra one-to-ones in the first couple of weeks, very, very important, because not necessarily about the functional activities, but often about the culture and how they're integrating into it and what they're bringing, that what they're trying to disrupt in it, what they see that needs to be disrupted in it, or maybe they might have a personal adjustment need that needs to be taken into account, and they might need OcuSport or, all those sorts of things. Taking those into account in a tailored way for the employee onboarding is so important. And I would say for anybody thinking about bringing on staff in this climate, overemphasize the engagement and have a very purposeful plan around that, around timings and different people reaching out, so that the person onboarding really feels welcomed. Is the most important thing, I would say.
And I would totally agree with that. I mean, you really have to over plan for it, because I do put myself in the shoes of new people starting, and it's daunting anyway, starting a new job, but it's even daunting when you log on 9 o'clock in the morning and you think, what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So definitely, I do think even just, here is that it's definitely a little bit more work on the manager, but I think that it's just the way it has to be. You've
Yeah.
got to, and actually one of the things you said, which I'm going to jump on as well, is that, yes, you've got to have that management presence throughout, but it's also great to get the rest of the team involved.
Definitely. And I think, there's one thing, a leader role modeling, the welcoming to the environment. There's another thing, where people are maybe contextualizing something that happened in a meeting. And like we were talking earlier, you don't necessarily have that walking out the door asking, what did that mean? Or what did that acronym mean? Or what did they mean by that project that they were talking about? And sometimes in that moment, it is really helpful to have a buddy to reach out to, or somebody on the team to reach out to them and say, listen, if there was anything that came up in that meeting, or, these are things that may not have been in your previous organization. This is my perspective, and how can I help you with it? And it sounds very fundamental, but actually in this environment virtually, it is so important. Yeah.
And to really give that, it's because a lot of the times I find with new starters, it's not the big things. They that's okay. They've been explained. It's the small things that they might not kind of really know what to do about. So that buddy system, I think, is key. And it doesn't have to be their manager. It's somebody else in the team.
Probably better if it's not, actually.
Exactly.
In a way, so that they're getting a wider contact base in the organization. And I think it also goes back to them feeling as though their voice is really important. Even in the first few weeks, the new eyes, the observations, and the value that they can bring with different ideas. And, in the first few months, as you go on, like really encouraging them to develop that confidence to input into every situation where they feel they have something they want to add, and input.
Yeah. My final question for you, Aisling, is it's a two-pronged question. I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the future of work? But I'm going to start it with, if I'd asked you this question 12 months ago, would you have had a different answer?
Yes, I would have done. Well, I'll give you the first thing from the findings, I guess. I believe is that, and the research findings support, the hybrid workplace is here to stay. Leaders are expecting 45% of employees will continue to work remotely. Employees are expecting to spend over a third of their time outside the office. So there is a real pull towards this hybrid workplace. And, a year ago, would we have been doing this podcast like this about this topic? Yeah. No, we wouldn't. And, would I be probably thinking now, gosh, I'm going to be in a couple of hours hitting the N7, I will be on a Friday evening. Our lives have dramatically changed. And I think there's been, of course, a lot of negatives in the situation. I don't have to tell you about the implications, of course, about COVID-19. And there are also a lot of positives in the way, the behaviors and the changes, how people have adapted. And I think it really does support that hybrid workplace is here to stay. And I personally think that is a massive step forward in terms of the business model, or the working model that we would have had for the last 200 years around this whole thing where you have a commute, you have a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 4 or whatever your working hours are, and then a commute, in most environments. And also a working environment where it is about, working the longer hours, the visibility, waiting until the boss has left the building. I mean, in lots of organizations, okay, there had been pockets of change, right? But this has been a dramatic change for all companies to have to get their head around so quickly. And we certainly would have spent the last year trying to enable customers, partners, to be able to adapt and change very quickly and empower their employees. And to ensure that they're seizing those productivities, ensuring that they're maintaining or creating a better innovative culture. And then ensuring that they're thinking about the change leadership that's required for their organization, and ensuring that empathy is still there, which I think is really, really important and will be more important going forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with you that empathy role. I think over the last 12 months, not that we've been in people's home, but people have had so much to deal with in regards to, and not just my own experience, but I complain an awful lot about homeschooling, but people may have, had sick relatives at home, or they'd have somebody in the house who is cocooning, or, lots of, or they could be isolated by themselves. So those kind of issues, companies have really had to embrace that empathy role for people, because we're now actually actively in their homes, people's homes, so what is happening at home is affecting work. That's the truth, right? There's no getting away from it. But I definitely think there's so much talk about this fourth industrial revolution that we're going into, and maybe the timing's right.
Indeed, yeah. There's a lot to be said for the kind of greater authenticity as well, and there's been loads of commentary about that, and that people are feeling as though they're focusing on the right things as well, both from an organization point of view and from themselves personally. So there are positives, but as I said, not to undermine the implications of the situation either, certainly a big change in the last year, that's for sure.
Exactly. And I just think we've become less busy people, which isn't a bad thing. Yeah. So Aisling, it's been so wonderful to speak to you. Thank you so much for being here today. If someone wants to get in contact with you, the best place to connect with you on LinkedIn, I suppose, would that be
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you so much, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks for listening. Check us out at HRLocker.com. The show was hosted by Christelle Rinn and produced by Jenny Martin. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. If you'd like to feature, get in touch by emailing us at marketing@HRLocker.com. You can also follow HRLocker on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn.